Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished checking the last mining. Drill on Asteroid Station Beta 7. Working alone in space wasn't easy, but he loved the quiet. No bosses breathing down his neck, no crowded offices, just him and his tools fixing things that broke down in the cold darkness between stars. He was packing up his equipment when something caught his eye. A bright flash in the distance like a shooting star, but wrong somehow. Stars didn't fall sideways in space. Jake grabbed his binoculars and watched as whatever it was crashed into a nearby asteroid with a silent explosion that lit up the rock face. Well, that's not something you see every day, Jake muttered to himself. He'd been working the asteroid belt for 12 years and had seen plenty of space junk, old satellites, and even a few meteorites. But this looked different. The way it moved before impact seemed controlled, like a ship trying to land rather than just falling. Jake's curiosity got the better of him. His shift was over anyway, and the company wouldn't miss him for a few hours. He fired up his small repair shuttle and headed toward the crash site. The asteroid was about 20 minutes away, small enough to land on but big enough to hide whatever had crashed there. As he got closer, Jake's jaw dropped. Sticking out of the asteroid's surface was the most beautiful piece of technology he'd ever seen. It wasn't like the boxy, practical ships humans built. This thing looked alive somehow, with smooth curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. The metal, if it was metal, shimmered with colors that changed as he moved around it. Jake suited up and stepped onto the asteroid's surface. His boots crunched on the rocky ground as he approached the crashed vessel. Parts of it were buried deep in the rock, but he could see through a crack in the hull. His flashlight beam revealed an interior that looked more like the inside of a seashell than a spaceship. That's when he saw her. A woman was lying unconscious near what looked like a control panel, at least. Jake thought it was a woman. She had the right shape, but her skin was a soft blue color, like the sky just before dawn. Strange silver markings ran along her arms and face, almost like tattoos, but they seemed to glow faintly. Jake's first thought was that this had to be some kind of movie set or elaborate joke. Aliens weren't real, were they? But as he squeezed through the crack in the hull and got closer, he could see she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm too natural to be fake. She was wearing some kind of armor, but not like anything Jake had ever seen. It looked like it was made of living metal that shifted and moved slightly with each breath she took. Something was wrong with it. Sparks were shooting from several points. Jake could hear a dangerous humming sound that made his teeth ache. His engineer's mind kicked in immediately. Whatever this armor was, it was some kind of life support system, and it was failing fast. Jake had spent his whole career fixing broken things, and broken was something he understood, no matter what planet it came from. Jake carefully examined the armor without touching the woman. The technology was way beyond anything humans had built, but the basic principles seemed similar. Power was flowing through crystal-like tubes, but several were cracked. Energy conduits were overloading because the main power regulator was damaged in the crash. "Okay, girl, let's see what we can do," Jake said softly, even though she couldn't hear him. He always talked to himself when he worked. It helped him think. The first problem was getting her out of the crashed ship safely. The whole vessel was unstable, and Jake could see stress fractures spreading through the hull. He couldn't fix the armor here, and if the ship collapsed, they'd both be in trouble. Jake went back to his shuttle and grabbed his emergency medical kit and some of his more delicate tools. He'd never worked on alien technology before, but electricity was electricity, and engineering was engineering. At least he hoped so. Very carefully, Jake lifted the unconscious woman and carried her back to his shuttle. She was lighter than he expected, and her skin felt warm even through his gloves. The armor came with her, still sparking and humming. Ominously back in his shuttle's small workshop, Jake got his first real look at the technology he was dealing with. The armor was incredible, thin as paper in some places, but obviously stronger than steel. The energy systems were like nothing in any textbook, using principles that made his head spin just thinking about them. But Jake was good at his job. He started with the basics, stop the immediate danger, then work on the bigger problems. He found what looked like an emergency power cutoff and managed to stop the dangerous overloading. The sparking stopped, and the woman's breathing seemed to get easier. Hour by hour, Jake worked through the night. Some repairs were obvious. Reconnect the broken conduits. Replace the damaged crystals with spares he found in sealed compartments in the armor itself. Other fixes required guesswork and hope. He'd never seen technology that seemed to think for itself, adjusting and adapting as he worked on it. The strangest part was how the armor seemed to help him. When Jake wasn't sure which crystal went where, the armor would glow faintly near the right spot. When he needed to access an internal component, panels would slide open at his touch as if the armor knew what he was trying to do. As dawn broke over the asteroid field, or what passed for dawn in the endless night of space, Jake stepped back and admired his work. The armor was humming smoothly now, its glow steady and healthy looking. The woman's breathing was deeper and more regular. Jake realized he'd just spent the entire night fixing technology that shouldn't exist, worn by someone who definitely wasn't human. His hands were shaking, not from tiredness, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. He was pretty sure he'd just made first contact with an alien species. I mean, she was lying unconscious in his workshop, depending on his repairs to keep her alive. Jake had always thought his life was pretty ordinary. It's just a guy who fixed things in space. He was starting to think that was about to change. Jake was drinking his third cup of coffee when she finally woke up. He'd been sitting in his workshop for 2 days, catching quick naps in his chair and checking on her every few hours. The armor was working perfectly now, its soft glow steady and reassuring. But he had no idea when or if she'd wake up. Her eyes opened slowly and Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug. Her eyes were the same soft blue as her skin, but they seemed to contain tiny stars that twinkled when she blinked. She sat up carefully, looking around the cramped workshop with the calm alertness of someone trained to assess new situations. Quickly, "Where am I?" she asked, and Jake's jaw dropped again. She was speaking perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that made even simple words sound like poetry. "You're on my repair shuttle," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found you crashed on an asteroid. Your armor was damaged, so I fixed it." Paused, then added, "I'm Jake, by the way." She studied him for a long moment, and Jake felt like she was reading his entire life story just by looking at him. Finally, she smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Thank you, Jake. You saved my life. I am... She hesitated. "You may call me Zara." Jake nodded, though something in her pause made him think Zara might not be her real name. But he figured everyone deserved their privacy, even aliens from who knows where. "Are you feeling okay?" "I mean, I've never fixed alien technology before. I just kind of guessed on some parts." Zara stood up and moved around the workshop with fluid grace. The armor seemed to respond to her movements, shifting and adjusting like a second skin. "You did excellent work," she said, running her hands over the repairs. "Better than excellent, actually. Some of these solutions are quite creative." Over the next few hours, Jake found himself in the strangest conversation of his life. Zara was curious about everything: his tools, his shuttle, even his coffee maker. She asked thoughtful questions about human engineering and seemed genuinely impressed by what she called their practical approach. "Your species builds things to last," she observed, examining Jake's wrench collection. "Many civilizations focus on elegance or power, but humans seem to understand that the best tool is one that works when you need it most." Jake felt a weird pride at that. He'd always been more about function than fashion when it came to his work. What surprised him most was how much Zara knew about technology. When Jake showed her some repairs he'd been struggling with on his mining equipment, she offered suggestions that were brilliant in their simplicity. She seemed to understand how things worked at a level that went beyond just knowing the theory. "Try routing the power through the secondary conduit instead," she suggested, pointing to a circuit board Jake had been fighting with for weeks. "Your primary pathway is overloaded." Jake made the adjustment, and the equipment hummed to life perfectly. "How did you know that would work?" Zara smiled mysteriously. "Good engineering is good engineering, regardless of which world it comes from." But Jake was starting to notice things about Zara that didn't quite add up. She had a way of speaking that sounded like she was used to giving orders and having them followed immediately. When she made suggestions, she seemed surprised. When Jake asked questions, Instead of just doing what she said, there was also the way she carried herself. Jake had met a lot of different people in his years working space stations and mining operations. Zara moved like someone who'd never had to worry about fitting in or being accepted. She had the quiet confidence of someone who'd always been important. Wherever she came from? So what do you do back home? Jake asked while they were sharing dinner. He'd heated up 2 of his emergency meal packets, apologizing for the bland food. I'm involved in diplomatic work, Zara said carefully. I travel between different worlds, helping to resolve disputes and maintain peace. Jake nodded, though he noticed she didn't actually answer his question. This must be important work if they give diplomats armor like that. Something flickered across Zara's face, worry, maybe, or fear. No. The galaxy can be a dangerous place. Not everyone welcomes diplomatic solutions. He kept thinking about the way Zara had dodged his questions and the sophisticated technology she wore like it was normal. He'd also been picking up strange signals on his long-range communications array, crypted transmissions in languages his computer couldn't identify. The next morning, Jake decided to do some investigating. While Zara was resting, he ran detailed scans of the signals he'd been receiving. What he found made his blood run cold. The transmissions were search patterns. Someone was looking for something or someone very important. The search grid was systematic and thorough, covering every asteroid and space station in the sector, whatever they were looking for. They were willing to commit serious resources to find it. Jake glanced over at Zara, who was examining his tool collection with the same focused attention a general might give to battle plans. She caught him looking and smiled, but Jake noticed the smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Zara, he said carefully, is there something you need to tell me? Because I'm picking up a lot of chatter out there and it sounds like someone's looking. For something pretty important, Zara's face went very still. For a moment, Jake saw something in her expression that made him understand why she wore armor, not the careful diplomat she'd been pretending to be, but someone much more dangerous and much more important. Jake, she said quietly, I need you to understand that sometimes the truth is more complicated than it appears. And sometimes keeping people safe means not telling them everything. Jake felt his stomach drop. Whatever Zara really was, whatever she was really involved in, he was starting to realize he'd gotten himself into something much bigger than a simple rescue mission. The question was, how big? And how much danger were they both in? Jake woke up to the sound of alarms screaming through his shuttle. Red lights were flashing everywhere, and his long-range sensors were going crazy. He stumbled out of his sleeping area, still half asleep, to find Zara standing perfectly still, in front of the main display screen. What's happening? Jake asked, rubbing his eyes and trying to focus on the readouts. Zara didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the screen with an expression Jake had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. On the display, Jake could see dozens of ships appearing at the edge of the solar system. Big ships. Really big ships. Zara, what are those? Jake's voice was getting higher as the reality of what he was seeing sank in. The ships were moving in perfect formation like a military fleet, and they were heading straight for their location. Zara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, Jake saw something that made his heart skip a beat. The careful diplomatic mask she'd been wearing for the past 3 days was gone. What he saw now was someone used to making life and death decisions for millions of people. Jake, she said quietly, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Yeah, I figured that out when the alien invasion fleet showed up, Jake said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. So who are you really? And please don't tell me you're just a diplomat, because diplomats don't usually have entire space fleets looking for them. Zara walked over to his workbench and sat down heavily. For the first time since he'd found her, she looked tired. Physically tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying weight that's too heavy for one person.
My real name is Zephyra, she said, and I'm the queen of the Excellent Empire.
Jake stared at her. Then he started laughing, not because it was funny, but because his brain couldn't process what she'd just said. Queen? It's like actual queen? Of an actual empire? 17 star systems? Zephyra said quietly. About 40 billion people call me their ruler. Jake stopped laughing. The way she said it with such simple, matter-of-fact tone, made it real in a way that hit him like a punch to the stomach. He'd been having coffee and casual conversation with an alien queen. He'd been showing her his wrench collection. "Oh no," Jake said, sinking into his chair. "Oh no, this is bad. This is really bad." Zephora nodded. "It gets worse. Those ships out there? I don't know if they're coming to rescue me or to finish what they started." "There was a coup attempt," Zephora explained. "Some of my military council decided they didn't want a queen anymore. They sabotaged my ship while I was traveling to a peace summit. I barely escaped, but my ship was badly damaged. That's how I ended up crashed on that asteroid." Jake's mind was racing. So those ships could be the good guys or the bad guys, and we won't know until they get here. Exactly. Jake stood up and started pacing around his small workshop. Okay. Let me think. How long until they reach us? Zephora checked his sensor readings. It's about 6 hours at their current speed, and you have no way to tell who they are. Not until they're close enough to identify specific ships and their commanders. By then, it might be too late to run. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. The silver markings on her skin that he'd thought were decorative now seemed different somehow, more formal, like the kind of thing that might mark royalty. The way she held herself, the way she spoke when she wasn't pretending to be someone else, it all made sense now. "Because knowing would have put you in danger," Zephora said. "As long as you didn't know who I was, you were just an innocent bystander. But now," she gestured at the approaching fleet, "now Earth's location has been discovered. Your world is going to be involved whether we want it or not." Oh. Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "My world? Earth? What does Earth have to do with this?" "Nothing, until now.
Oh.
But by helping me, by bringing me here, you've made Earth a player in our civil war. The rebels will see any world that harbors me as an enemy. My loyal forces will want to establish Earth as an ally to keep it safe." Jake sat down hard. "So basically by saving your life, I might have doomed my entire planet. I'm sorry, Jake. I truly am. If I could undo it, I would. But I was dying and you saved me. I couldn't tell you the truth then, and by the time I could, it was too late." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the alien fleet get closer. Jake's brain was trying to process everything. The fact that aliens existed, that he'd been talking to their queen, that Earth was about to get involved in an intergalactic war. "What happens now?" Jake finally asked. Zephora stood up and began checking her armor systems. "Now I have to make a choice. I can surrender myself to whoever is in those ships and hope they leave Earth alone? Or ... Or what? Or we fight back." Jake looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Fight back? Against an entire fleet? With what? My mining equipment? And your armor? "You'd be surprised what good engineering can accomplish," Zephora said with a small smile. "You've already proven that your species has a talent for practical solutions to impossible problems. This isn't impossible. It's suicidal." "Maybe. But Jake, I need you to understand something. If those are rebel ships and I surrender, they won't just take me prisoner. They'll destroy any evidence that I was ever here. That includes your shuttle, your mining station, and probably you." Jake felt his mouth go dry. "And if they're your loyal people, then we still have a problem, because the rebels will be right behind them. Either way, Earth is going to become a battleground unless we can find a third option." Jake looked around his workshop at his tools, his spare parts, his simple equipment designed for fixing mining machinery. Then he looked at Zephora's armor, still humming with technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had built. "You said good engineering is good engineering, right?" Jake asked slowly. "Yes." "And you mentioned I had a talent for practical solutions?" Zephora nodded, and Jake thought he saw a spark of hope in her star-filled eyes. "Then I guess we better get to work," Jake said, "because I've got an idea. It's crazy, and it probably won't work, but it's better than just sitting here waiting to die." For the first time since the alarm started, Zephora smiled. "Tell me your idea, Jake. And remember, sometimes the craziest plans are the ones that work." Outside the shuttle, the alien fleet continued its approach, unaware that a human engineer and an alien queen were about to attempt something that would change the course of galactic history. Jake's idea was completely insane, and that's exactly why it might work. "You want to do what?" Zephora asked, staring at Jake like he'd grown a second head. "Turn mining drones into weapons," Jake repeated, already pulling equipment from storage. "Lockers. Look, I've got 12 heavy-duty mining drones designed to crack apart asteroids. They're built tough, they're fast, and they've got industrial cutting lasers that can slice through solid rock." Zephora watched as Jake started laying out drone components on his workbench. "Jake, these are mining tools. That fleet out there has military-grade shields and weapon systems." "Yeah, but they're not expecting mining tools," Jake said, connecting. "Power cables with practiced efficiency. Your armor technology, can it be adapted to work with human equipment?" Zephora examined one of the drones, running her hands over its simple but sturdy construction. "Theoretically, yes. The energy matrices in my armor could boost the power output significantly. But Jake, even if we increase their capabilities, 12 drones against an entire fleet, not just 12 drones," Jake said with a grin that was equal parts excitement and terror. 12 drones, plus every piece of mining equipment in this asteroid field. Plus a few tricks I learned from 20 years of making things work when they shouldn't. For the next 3 hours, Jake and Zephora worked like their lives depended on it, because they did. Zephora's armor contained manufacturing capabilities that Jake had never dreamed of.
Oh.
Tiny robots smaller than dust mites could rebuild technology at the molecular level. While energy conduits could be grown like plants wherever they were needed, Jake's practical engineering knowledge combined with Zephora's advanced technology in ways that surprised them both. Where Jake saw a way to jury-rig a solution, Zephora could provide the tools to make it work perfectly. Where Zephora's technology was too complex, Jake found simpler approaches that were just as effective. "Your species thinks differently then." "Mine," Zephora observed, as Jake welded an armor component to a mining drone's hull. "We build things to be elegant and sophisticated. You build things to work. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody expects," Jake replied, sweat dripping despite the cool air in his workshop. They'd just finished modifying the 8th drone when the long-range sensor started screaming again. The alien fleet had arrived at the outer edge of the asteroid field and was beginning to deploy into attack formation. "They're scanning everything," Zephora said, monitoring the communications. "Both factions are here. I can identify ships loyal to me, but there are just as many controlled by the rebels." Jake activated the external cameras and got his first real look at the alien fleet. The ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, sleek and deadly, like sharks, made of metal and energy. Even the smallest vessels were 10 times larger than his shuttle. "Can you talk to your people?" Jake asked. "I'm trying, but the rebels are jamming communications. They don't want me to identify who's who until it's too late." Suddenly, weapons fire erupted between the two factions. Energy beams that could vaporize. Asteroids lit up the darkness as the civil war Jake and Zephora had been trying to avoid began right in front of them. "Well, that answers that question," Jake muttered, watching explosions bloom like deadly flowers among the alien ships. "They're fighting each other." "Not for long," Zephora said grimly. "Look." Several ships from both factions had broken off from the main battle and were heading straight for Jake's shuttle. The message was clear, regardless of their differences. Both sides wanted Zephora, and they weren't going to let her escape. "Time to see if crazy actually works," Jake said, activating the modified mining drones. The drones launched from his shuttle like angry wasps. Their movements erratic and unpredictable thanks to Jake's modifications. Instead of flying in neat formations like military drones, they moved like the mining equipment they'd originally been: practical, determined, and absolutely relentless. The alien ships immediately opened fire, but Jake had anticipated this. The drones didn't try to dodge the sophisticated targeting systems. Instead, they flew straight into the asteroid field, using the floating rocks as cover the way a miner would use them to get to the best or deposits. "They're trying to lock onto the drones," Zephora reported, monitoring the alien communications. "But they can't get a clean shot." "That's the idea," Jake said, maneuvering his shuttle deeper into the asteroid field. "In space, fancy flying gets you killed. Smart flying keeps you alive." The first drone reached its target, a rebel ship that was trying to flank Jake's position. Instead of attacking the heavily shielded hull, the drone did exactly what it was designed to do. It latched onto the ship's hull and started mining the industrial cutting laser. Boosted by Zephyra's armor technology, sliced through the alien ship's armor like it was paper. But instead of trying to destroy the entire vessel, the drone targeted the ship's weapon systems with the precision of equipment designed to extract valuable minerals from solid rock. "It's working," Zephora said, amazement in her voice. "The ship is disabled but not destroyed." Jake's unconventional tactics were working better than he'd hoped. The alien ships were designed to fight other spaceships, not swarms of mining equipment that treated them like particularly stubborn asteroids. The drones moved with the single-minded determination of machines, built to work in impossible conditions. But the rebels adapted quickly. Several ships began targeting the asteroids themselves, trying to flush out the drones by destroying their cover. That's when Jake played his ace. "Remember those mining charges I mentioned?" Jake asked, his finger hovering over a control that would change everything. "Jake, what did you do?" "I spent 12 years setting up mining operations in this asteroid." Field Jake said with a smile that was pure mischief. "I know where every explosive charge is placed, every weak point in every rock, and exactly how to bring it all down at once." Jake hit the control, and the asteroid field exploded. Not all at once, but in a carefully orchestrated chain reaction that Jake had been planning since he first started working this sector. Asteroids cracked apart in precise patterns, creating debris fields that moved with predictable trajectories, predictable to someone who understood mining, but chaos to military pilots trained for open space combat. The alien ships found themselves trying to navigate a three-dimensional minefield of tumbling rocks, while Jake's drones moved through the chaos like they were born to it, because in a way, they were. "You turned the entire asteroid field into a weapon," Zephora said, watching as both factions of the alien fleet struggled to maintain formation in the artificial meteor shower. "I turned it into a job site," Jake corrected. "And my drones know how to work a job site better than anyone." The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the fleet arrived, Jake thought they might actually survive this. His crazy plan was working, and the look of respect in Zephyra's star-filled eyes told him that maybe, just maybe, a human engineer could hold his own against an alien empire. The question now was whether they could end this fight before someone got desperate enough to start blowing up planets. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, Jake's mining drones had accomplished something that military strategists would study for decades. They had defeated a space fleet using nothing but practical engineering and sheer stubbornness. Jake sat in his pilot's seat, exhausted and covered in grease, watching as the last rebel ship surrendered. His drones had systematically disabled vessel after vessel, not by destroying them, but by treating them like mining projects. Weapon systems had been carefully extracted, engines had been precisely shut down, and communications arrays had been selectively disabled. "I can't believe that worked," Jake muttered, wiping his hands on a rag that was somehow dirtier than his hands. Zephora was standing beside him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked completely relaxed. "Your people have a saying, don't they? About the right tool for the right job?" "Yeah, something like that. You turned this entire situation into a job, Jake, and then you did the job." The communications array crackled to life, and a deep voice spoke in the musical language Jake had been hearing in encrypted transmissions. Zephora responded, and Jake could hear the relief in her voice even though he couldn't understand the words. "Commander Thane," Zephora explained to Jake, "he's been leading the search for me. The rebels are surrendering, and the coup is over." Jake nodded, though he was having trouble processing that it was actually finished. "So what happens now? You go back to being queen of the galaxy?" "Eventually. First, we need to talk about Earth." That got Jake's attention. "What about Earth?" Zephora turned to face him fully, and Jake saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "What, Jake? What you did today changes everything. Your species has proven that they can hold their own against advanced civilizations. not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through ingenuity and determination. I got lucky with some mining equipment, but you didn't get lucky. You took an impossible situation and found a solution no one else would have thought of. That's not luck, that's intelligence. And it's exactly the kind of intelligence the galaxy needs. Over the next few hours, Jake found himself in the middle of negotiations between Earth represented, apparently by him and an interstellar empire. Commander Thane's ship docked with Jake's shuttle, and Jake got his first look at more aliens. They were similar to Zephyra, but with different skin tones and markings. Commander Thane was a deep purple color with gold markings that seemed to shift and move. His armor was more military-looking than Zephyra's, but Jake could see the same basic technology. "The human engineer who saved our queen," Thane said in accented but clear English. "Your reputation precedes you." "I have a reputation already?" Jake asked. "Every ship in the fleet watched you turn mining drones into a tactical advantage," Thane replied with what Jake was learning to recognize as an alien smile. "Military academies will be teaching your strategy for generations." Jake looked at Zephyra. "I think you're giving me too much credit, am I?" "Jake, in 6 hours you ended a civil war, saved my empire, and proved that Earth deserves a place in galactic politics. I'd say I'm not giving you enough credit." The negotiations took place in Jake's workshop, which suddenly seemed way too small for representatives of two different civilizations, but somehow they made it work. Jake found himself speaking for humanity, a responsibility he definitely hadn't asked for, but seemed to have anyway. "Here's the thing," Jake said during one particularly tense moment in the discussions. "Earth doesn't want to conquer anyone or build an empire. We just want to be left alone to figure things out at our own pace." "But you can't be left alone now," Zephyra pointed out. "The galaxy knows Earth exists, and Earth has proven it's not helpless. Other civilizations will want to make contact. Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Jake said. "It as equals, not as subjects of some empire or as primitives who need protection." Thane and Zephyra exchanged glances. "What are you proposing?" Thane asked. "A partnership. Not Earth joining your empire, but Earth and your empire working together, when it makes sense for both sides. You share some technology that helps us. We share some ideas that help you, such as..." Jake gestured around his workshop. "You've got amazing technology, but sometimes you make things more complicated than they need to be. We're good at making things simple and reliable. Seems like we could learn from each other." It took 3 days to work out the details, but in the end, they had an agreement. Earth would remain independent, but the Axelan Empire would establish a small diplomatic station in the asteroid belt. Jake's mining operation would be expanded into a proper facility where human and Axelan engineers could work together on projects that benefited both civilizations. "You realize this makes you Earth's first interstellar diplomat?" Zephyra told Jake as they watched the construction drones building the new station. "I'm not a diplomat," Jake protested. "I'm just a guy who fixes things. Sometimes fixing things is the most important diplomacy of all." 6 months later, Jake was back to his regular routine, sort of. Still got up every morning, drank his coffee, and worked on fixing broken equipment. But now some of that equipment was Axelan technology, and some of his co-workers were aliens who appreciated his straightforward approach to problem-solving. Zephyra visited regularly, always arriving in person despite having an entire empire to run. She said it helped her remember that the best solutions were often the simplest ones. "Any regrets?" she asked during one of her visits, finding Jake elbow-deep in the engine of an Axelan transport ship. "About what?" "About that day you decided to investigate a crashed ship instead of just finishing your shift and going home." Jake thought about it while he tightened a coupling that had been installed. Wrong by someone who'd obviously never worked with their hands? Not really. I mean, it's been pretty crazy. But crazy isn't necessarily bad. And Earth's doing fine. Turns out people are pretty adaptable when they need to be. Plus having friends with faster-than-light travel has its advantages. Zephyra laughed. "Is that what we are, friends?" Jake emerged from the engine compartment, grease-stained and grinning. "Well, you did try to get me killed by an alien space fleet. But I guess I can forgive you for that." "How generous of you." Sides. Jake said, picking up his coffee mug, "Someone's got to keep you from making your technology more complicated than it needs to be. Might as well be me." Outside the station's windows, human and Axelan ships worked side by side, building something. New in the space between stars? It wasn't the future anyone had expected, but it was the future they'd built together, one practical solution at a time. Jake had always thought his job was just fixing things that were broken. He was starting to realize that sometimes the most important things to fix were the ones nobody even knew were broken in the first place.